Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Bethesda lunch. And today I'd like to introduce Evan Polin. And Evan is the president of Polin Performance Group, LLC. He has 25 years of experience in sales, coaching, and consulting for professionals like lawyers, for example. So he helps them to enhance their sales, profits, and productivity. And so he basically teaches them the skills how to get the good clients. Evan is the co-author of the book Selling Professional Services the Sandler Way Nobody Ever Told Me I'd Have to Sell. Evan integrates his counseling background with proven business development strategies to deliver exceptional results for his clients. Evan grew up in southern New Jersey and he enjoys family time with his wife, 19-year-old son, and mini Burn Doodle Harper. In his free time, Evan enjoys traveling and cheering on his beloved Philadelphia sports team. And today, Evan, thank you for presenting, and we will hear from Evan about sales skills. Thank you, Evan, and the floor is yours.
So thank you so much for inviting me today. And I look forward to uh, hopefully sharing some information with all of you. My goal for today is for all of you to have three, four, five takeaways that you can take and start immediately using in your practice. And again, really my focus area is working with attorneys, working with professionals on that stuff that they never learned in law school in terms of how to develop a book of business, how to develop a practice. I apologize up front. I am going to go through tons and tons of information in a very quick period of time. Again, my suggestion would just be maybe on a piece of paper somewhere, jot down one or two hot topics, one or two things that you might want to go back and revisit afterwards. And as we're going through, if you have any questions, feel free to throw something in the chat. Just take yourself off of mute. But really, what I want to do is help all of you with, again, a couple of tips in terms of how to build, how to grow your book of business, how to grow your practice. So I really like to start with a quote from Benjamin Franklin, which is, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. A lot of times I will work with solo small firms. Oftentimes they're living where they are. They may bring a client or two with them. They may have some kind of an idea of a number in the back of their head in terms of the amount of business they'd like to do, but really don't have any kind of plan in terms of exactly how it is that they're going to get there. So today I am going to cover in broad strokes two things. One is making sure that we have a plan for how we're getting in front of the opportunities we want to get in front of. And then second, how do we do a really good job quickly qualifying or disqualifying when we're doing intakes, when we have those first calls, to make sure that we are not doing a lot of free consulting for someone who's trying to take our advice and use it on their own or turn it over to another attorney that maybe isn't as expensive, but they think if they give them good ideas, they may be able to implement those ideas. And that's really, kind of what I want to share with all of you today. So, real quick mindset for the next 35, 40 minutes or so. For some of this, you may think that you already know it. What I want you to think about is, can you go a little bit deeper? Can you learn a little something else? You might think for some of it, I'm already doing a lot of this. Can I get a little bit better, a little bit more consistent, a little bit more effective? A lot of times when I work with my clients, they don't need to radically change what they're doing. It's just one or two small tweaks that can have a huge difference in terms of how they're building and growing their practice. You might think, hey, some of these things I'm not quite sure how it would work within my practice. What I want you to think about is, are there tweaks that you could make based on what I'm sharing that could work for you personally, that could work for your practice? For some of you, you may think, geez, I've never really done this before. It's, am I willing to move out of my comfort zone? Am I willing to try something new so that I can, again, I get better results? Another quote that I like to use as I start to talk about this, and actually, if one of you is bold enough to come off of mute, um, Anybody know the definition of insanity? Again, what I'm looking for is the definition of insanity.
To keep doing the same thing over and over again if it gives you a bad result.
Very, very close. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So if we're currently not doing way more business that we can handle, making way more than we can spend, what I want to look at is, are there one or two things that we can tweak to build the kind of practice that we want to have? So first, some of the challenges that I typically find with the attorneys that I work with, a lot of times, again, they have an idea of what they'd like to do, but really have no idea where to start when it comes to a prospecting and business development plan. For a lot of them, it's figuring out, how do I balance servicing my clients with also making sure that I'm going out and looking for work. Time management is a major issue. There are lots of folks that I talk to that have 1,000+ LinkedIn connections, have all kinds of contacts, but those contacts aren't turning into clients. They're not turning into referral sources. Or we've got all kinds of strategic partners in name, but none of those strategic partners are actually giving us any referrals. In most of your areas, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of attorneys. How do we differentiate ourselves from everybody else who's out there, especially with folks who may not be all that sophisticated? For a lot of folks, they work with the same clients over and over again and having a hard time going out and finding new clients, not getting enough referrals. May take too long from the first consult to somebody actually signing an engagement letter. Other attorneys I find end up wasting time on opportunities that don't go anywhere. They get used for free consulting. People are happy to pick our brains until it comes time to signing an engagement letter and us getting paid, getting pushback on our fee, getting pushback on our rate, working with folks, but they're not really the ideal kinds of clients that we'd like to be working with on a regular basis. We've got LinkedIn accounts. We're on LinkedIn, but not really leveraging it to get really good referrals and introductions. For those of you who may be going after larger corporate engagements, frustrated by committee decisions that are time wasters, things that seem to be taking forever. We seem to get in front of get to the end of the process and then realize it wasn't actually the decision makers who could sign a contract or an engagement letter that we were talking to. For those of you that may have multiple different practice groups within your firm, difficulty cross-selling, upselling, the sales cycle is just too long. Up and down, inconsistent results. We're really, really busy for a while. Once we get through the work, we're in a valley, and it's how do we make sure that we have things be more consistent. And for almost every attorney that I work with, they're uncomfortable prospecting for new business. They don't want to come across as salesy, but also need to get in front of new opportunities. And it's, how do we strike that balance? So where I thought I would start is just by talking about some of the components of the prospecting plan. Somebody asked, and yes, I am happy to send out a PDF of this PowerPoint deck after the fact. So I will make sure to get that out to everybody. That's not an issue. So with developing a business development plan, some of the basic components that you should look at. One, first, what is my ideal client prospect profile? There are so many people that when I first work with them, when I ask them who they're looking to work with, first they'll say the entire world, and that's really difficult to target. But they still, when I get them to start to ratchet down at the beginning, they have a really hard time articulating who they're looking to work with. What industry, what size company, who within the company, what kind of individuals do I want to work with? If we can articulate it, really difficult to go and find it, really difficult to have good referral partners and share with them what we're looking for if we can't articulate it ourselves. So that's the first thing we need to do, is really look at what is our ideal client profile, who do we want to work with, and what's going to fit in well with our practice. You also need to look at whatever business development time you have. And I find for most solos, they've got anywhere from 3 to 8 to 10 hours a week for business development. So what are you doing? Are you asking for referrals? Are you getting involved in the bar? Are you getting involved in professional associations? But where are you spending your time when it comes to prospecting? And with prospecting, If you've got a plan, is the plan in writing? And is it realistic based on the amount of time that you have for business development? In addition, when we're looking to target, what industries, again, if it's commercial that we're looking for, if not, what kind of people do we want to be in front of? If it's larger companies or the particular business units, what are the services that we want to be promoting? Who would make good referral partners for us? And do we have enough of the right kind of referral partners? Again, somebody could be in the right industry, but if they're not in front of the kinds of folks who are your clients, or if they think that they're competing with you, you're not going to get very many referrals from them. So what does that look like individually for each and every one of you? What activities make sense? What is your budget? As a solo, as a small firm, we don't have an unlimited budget. We can't advertise all over the place. We can't join every professional association. We can't sponsor a lot of things. Is our plan, yeah, is our plan realistic? Do we have the budget to execute on our plan? And then the last thing that I find a lot of folks don't do really well, are we measuring return on our investment for the different things that we're doing? How much of our time is it taking? How much, if anything, are we investing? How many new matters have come from it? Have we met any referral partners that have actually referred us business? But oftentimes I find when it comes to the business development plan, people fall back into that trap of that definition of insanity. They keep doing the same things. We get stuck in certain patterns. We're not seeing the results that we want to get, but we're still doing it anyway. We really need to take a step back, look at what's working, what's not working. An exercise I would suggest all of you do if you're not already doing it. All of your clients that have come in, try to identify how did you initially get in front of the opportunity. See if there are certain patterns or things more productive than others. And if so, can we do more of that stuff on a regular basis so that we're maximizing, the return on the time that we're spending? And if there's things that we're doing, associations that we belong to that cost money, that take time, that we're not getting anything out of, first we need to be honest with ourselves. Are we working it properly? If we're just writing the check and expecting to see results, probably not a realistic expectation. But if we're actually working it well and still not seeing the results, then maybe we need to drop that and look to spend our time and effort somewhere else. The other thing I want you to think about is the size of your clients. And the way that I really like to think about client size is revenue to me. So geographically, I'm located in the greater Philadelphia area. Comcast is the biggest company in the region. If I am working with one individual from Comcast, that's not going to be a really large client revenue size. That's going to be a small client. So it doesn't matter that it's someone from Comcast that I'm working with. It matters how much revenue is coming in. So I break client size down into three categories. The small little clients, and for you in each of your individual practices, determine what a small client is. I identify those as rabbits. There are pros and cons of rabbits. Oftentimes, there's not a very complex decision-making process. So sometimes you can get decisions more quickly. But oftentimes with rabbits, if you have all rabbits, you may be servicing tons of clients, really busy and not making anywhere close to the revenue that you'd like to make. The other thing I sometimes find is with really small clients, you may arm wrestle over every nickel and every dime and get all kinds of rate pushback when you're in front of really small clients. Dear are your ideal clients. If you could think about the ideal kinds of services that you're providing with the ideal client profile, with the ideal amount that you're billing, that's your dear client. I suggest that most of my clients spend the overwhelming majority of their time in business development trying to target those. Again, what most of my clients do, I'm going to take you through an exercise in a second, is if for me, if a dear client is somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 in revenue over the course of a year, when I'm doing the math for myself, I might call a dear client, okay, an average deer is worth $15,000. And then elephants are those really, really large clients, those clients where one or two clients over the course of the year might make your year. I think, Robert, you were talking about that you may be bringing on some staff because you're dealing with one really large thing. That would be an elephant. They are great because they're a lot of revenue, but oftentimes they take a lot longer to close. The close percentage is typically smaller. Lots of things could go wrong along the way. I also find that oftentimes people will end up coming to me looking for my help because they had one or two clients that was worth like 70 or 80% of their revenue. And if that client goes away, they're scrambling and they're almost starting from scratch. The other thing I sometimes find with elephants is there can be scope creep. They know that they're a large client, so they will ask for more and more and more in the way of services in your time, not expecting to pay anymore. And sometimes, if you were to go and do the math, what you may be getting from them on an hourly rate may not be anywhere close to what you're getting from a deer or a mid-sized client on an hourly rate. So, one of the things I would suggest that all of you look at is how much revenue you want to do in your practice in a year. What percentage of that should come from rabbits? What percentage of that should come from deer? What percentage of that should come from elephants? And then put together a plan that matches that. Because the one thing that we can control is how much activity that we're doing, but we can't control whether or not that next prospect that we talk to is qualified or not. And what I will do with my clients and with my clients, it's a lot more complex, but I'll have them work backwards. What's your average client worth? Yeah, I'm sorry, how much overall revenue do you want to do to start? What's your average client worth? So how many new clients do we need? And then we're not getting the client 100% of the time that the engagement letter goes out. So if we're closing 75 or 80% of the time when we send out an engagement letters, how many engagement letters need to go out? And then taking another step backwards, not everybody we do an initial consult with is qualified enough where we get to the point where we're sending them an engagement letter. So how many consults do we need to do to send out the number of engagement letters to get the number of new clients? With my clients that I'm personally working with, I've actually got an Excel spreadsheet where they can rework the numbers, determine what percentage of the revenue they want coming from each area, looking at the close percentage, so that they know how many consults per month they need to be doing. And then from there, we can build a plan around how they're going to have enough of the right kinds of conversations and what that plan is going to look like. But we shouldn't just kind of put a number down on paper in December in terms of what we want to do the following year. Cross our fingers, wishing and hoping are not sales strategies, are not business development strategies. We should have a plan in place for how we are going to develop the amount of business that we want to develop. So before I switch gears and talk about how to qualify opportunities, is there any question on this part? So again, what I wanted to do as we set up today is kind of give you a high level. I have like 10, 12, 15 different modules on this. Again, I just wanted to give you kind of a high level overview and maybe give you one or two things that you can take out of this that you can start to put into practice. So show of hands, how many of you would like to look, sound, feel like a salesperson when you're out there marketing and developing for business? Don't see any hands going up. That's a really good thing. I want to play a word association game with all of you. You can either take yourself off of mute or throw a comment or two in the chat. When I say the word salesperson, what are the first words that come to mind? And don't be polite, don't be nice. I've got smarmy, slime, pushy, annoying. Anything else? So we're going along a long light path. Next, yeah, used cars, absolutely. And again, we kind of see that here in this picture. Next, again, I'm not asking you as attorneys. If I were to ask the general public and I were to say the word attorney, what do you think are some of the words that might come up? I'm going to go back to the last one that was for salesperson and some people use for attorney. Annoying, expensive. Now, somebody else pretty much the same list. Absolutely. Next page is a diagram. The bigger the word, the more frequently it came up when people were surveyed. So pushy, yuck, hard, difficult, annoying, dishonest, slimy, necessary, manipulative. So what we find is if we walk, talk, email, behave, text like a stereotypical salesperson or business developer, we're going to get put in that category. So what we need to do is make sure that we look, sound, feel different. And by the way, yeah, with attorneys, do we all know attorneys that live down to this reputation? Is there a reason why the reputation's out there?
Hey, Evan, Damon Pace here. Uh, I appreciate your presentation. And one of the things I was going to say, just to bring out the term annoying, I think it's not picking up on social cues. So in a conversation, if you're at a happy hour or whatever networking event, sometimes there are social cues laid down. And it seems like the more annoying salespeople don't pick up on them and they just keep pushing. They just keep pushing with their agenda and not really acknowledging social cues like this isn't going in that direction. Maybe I should go in a different one. And so I think maybe that's where none of us want to be, right? None of us want to be that person.
We don't want to come across like that person selling the multi-level marketing stuff where everybody's running to the opposite side of the room as soon as we come in. So yeah, we need to pay attention to those social cues. In a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about building rapport and communication style, but we absolutely need to pay attention to those things so that we don't come across that way. So what I want to share with you first is the traditional approach to business development. This is how we find most people do business development. If you disagree with any of this, let me know. On the far left-hand side in the orange, first step is just trying to find a prospect, trying to find somebody who's interested in having a conversation with us, getting the phone to ring, getting somebody interested in a consult. I find, unfortunately, how most people qualify is what I call the mirror test. Stick a mirror in front of somebody's nose and mouth. If they can fog up the mirror, to Damon's point, if they're not running away, if they're allowing me to talk, I will go ahead and meet with them. And then I find what most attorneys do is when we get to the presentation step next, unfortunately, we're focusing more on ourselves. Let me tell you about myself. Let me tell you about our experience. Let me tell you how we work with our clients. I just started working with a client about 3 weeks ago. I asked her to tell me about her process. What she shared with me in the consult was that she would spend the first 15 minutes walking somebody through what the steps were in terms of how she worked with them. And again, it was 100% presenting based on this is what we do, this is how we work with our clients. I made a couple of suggestions to her. She was on average getting about 8 to 10 calls a week, closing one. After we started working together, she started asking more questions to get the other person to talk more. The next 2 weeks in a row, she was closing 6 out of 10 of the consults rather than one to 2 out of 10. But again, our natural inclination, we want to try to show off our expertise, show our client that we know what we're talking about. And then after we're done presenting in terms of what we do, prospect oftentimes has objections. It may be our fee. It may be the less sophisticated ones want some kind of guarantee of an outcome. It might be how quickly they want something done. And we may go back and forth negotiating over the fees over other things. And then hopefully at the end, we get the close. So there's a couple challenges with the traditional approach. First, we really don't have a whole lot of control of the process. We're sharing a lot of information and then hoping that they say yes. We really haven't built, going back to actually Damon's point before, we really haven't built trust or rapport with our potential client. Oftentimes, we're really presenting what we can do before we've actually qualified the opportunity, which can lead to us wasting a lot of time chasing an unqualified opportunity. Sometimes we end up negotiating several times within the process, which cuts into what our fees should be. Sometimes we may end up presenting solutions that don't really fit what the prospect needs because we haven't heard enough from them. We can, depending on the type of law that you're practicing, start to become commoditized a little bit. And you may find out, especially within an organization, within a business, that it may actually be the influencers that we're talking to and not ultimately the person who's going to ultimately make the decision. So, what we want to do, what I want to just briefly introduce to all of you today, is a consultative approach to business development, one that's got honesty, integrity, humility. We are not looking to trick anybody into anything that's not in their best interest. We're also not looking to get everybody to say yes. The process is built for us to qualify or disqualify opportunities more quickly, not to get everybody to say yes. And it should be a process. We shouldn't be going by gut. We shouldn't be going by feel. It should be a repeatable process that we're doing in every single consult that we have with a prospective client. It should be predictable. Based on what you're hearing, you should know whether or not this is a qualified opportunity, whether or not I want to work with that particular client. And the client should have a pretty good idea in terms of whether or not I'm a good fit for them. And it should be outcome driven. We shouldn't be having conversations just to have conversations, but we should be moving to we're either a really good fit for them, we see it, they see it, and now we're talking about how to move forward. They feel for whatever reason it's not a good fit, and we're going to get a no. And I'd rather get that in the initial consult or on the second call rather than spinning my wheels. I may determine that it's not a good fit for me. And if that's the case, I may suggest other resources, or we're going to determine it's a good fit. And together we're going to figure out what the next steps are. And I'm not going to be left with a good feeling at the end of the call, but then wondering why they're not responding to me after I've sent out the engagement letter or after I've reached back out to them. So the first part of the process is building rapport. There are 3 rules of business as it goes to building rapport. If you disagree with any of them, let me know. Rule number 1, people like to work with people that they like. Rule number 2, people like to work with people like themselves. And rule number 3, it's not necessarily about your service or your expertise. It's more about who you know in your relationships. Show of hands or your virtual hand, how many of you know of people who are really successful? They're not the best at what they do. They're not the smartest lawyers, but they have really, really good relationships. And because of that, they're really successful. So do we all know those people? So what we want to do is there are things that we can do on purpose to make people feel comfortable with us right from the beginning. Studies show it takes about 7 seconds for somebody to make a first impression. So it doesn't even give us enough time to show off our expertise or lack of expertise. So what I like to do with my clients is work with them on what are some of those things: communication style, learning style, other things that you can do to make people feel more comfortable with you right from the beginning. And building rapport isn't something that we do in the first 3 minutes of the first conversation and then drop, but it's something that needs to be there throughout the entire life of our relationship with our prospects, with our clients, with our referral partners. As we get into the consult, we want to find out more about them. Again, if it's corporate, their company, their role. If it's an individual, their challenges, what led to them scheduling the consult. And ultimately, how were they hoping that we were going to help? That takes us to the next step of the process, which is setting an agenda with our prospect. So, have any of you ever gone into a meeting and you thought that you were going to talk about one thing and the prospect or the client wanted to talk about something else? Or have you ever walked into a meeting, you figured it was going to be a 20-minute, half-hour consult, and they were hoping for an hour, hour and a half of your time? Or if you were going to pitch a larger corporate thing, you thought that you had an hour and they cut you off after 25 or 30 minutes? Has anybody ever heard these words at the end of a meeting? This was really great. Let me think it over. So have we all heard that in some form or fashion before? Unfortunately, in my experience, more time than not, think it over means it's going to be no, but you're going to have to follow up several times, or it's just going to fall off the radar before you realize that it's a no. Or again, we hear things, we feel really good at the end of a consult, but then nothing happens. What we want to do is make sure that we're on the same page as our potential client at all times. So some things that we want to make sure that we're on the same page. How much time do we have for the consult? How much time do we have for the meeting? Oftentimes we just jump right in without asking. Hey, Joe. Hey, Keith. What were you hoping we were going to accomplish during this call? And what would make this a really good, really productive meeting from your perspective? You'll be amazed how much people will tell you exactly what they're looking for. We were just so anxious to jump in that we didn't give them that opportunity. If it's a corporate opportunity, oftentimes I'll send out an email 2 or 3 days before the consult, letting them know that I'm prepping and I want to make sure that I'm covering everything that they want to cover. 2/3 to 3/4 of the time, I will get a long email back outlining everything that they want to cover during the course of the meeting. My job becomes much easier if I know exactly what they want to cover before I ever get to the meeting. I'm going to share with them what my agenda is. Part of my agenda is always asking if it's okay if I ask questions. Again, that should be really logical based on what you all do. But I find if somebody gives me expressive permission, they're never going to get mad at me for doing what they told me it was okay to do. So if I ask if it's okay to ask questions, let them know that they're going to get really specific. We may get into finances, we may get into personal impact. It's okay if it's okay, just let me know if it's too detailed, and I'll tell them it's okay to tell me no. But then I've got carte blanche to ask whatever questions I need to ask, which is really going to help me better understand the situation, better understand what they're looking for. If they're interviewing 2 or 3 different firms, finding out what they're looking for out of the attorney that they want to hire. And then the other thing I'm going to do in the first half of the meeting is set the expectation that we need to come to some kind of conclusion by the end of the meeting. So if I'm meeting with Elliot, I may share with Elliot, geez, as we're talking, if this isn't a fit from your perspective for whatever reason, would you be comfortable sharing that with me? Don't want to waste your time if there's not a good fit. By the way, Elliot, if as we're talking, if I see that I may not be the right attorney based on what you're sharing, based on what you're looking for, would you be okay if I shared that with you? And by the way, if I'm not the right attorney, I may have 1 or 2 better resources for you. And if, as we're talking, it seems like there might be a good fit between what you're looking for and what I do, can we just take the last couple minutes of the conversation to figure out what good next steps are? So it's not necessarily you're signing an agreement or we're never talking again. I just want to carve out the last couple minutes of the meeting to figure out what next steps are, if it's appropriate to take next steps at the end of the meeting. I find that if I share with somebody in the first part of the meeting that the expectation is that we're going to figure out next steps by the end, they pay much closer attention. They're a lot more engaged. They start asking a lot more questions. And they're not just sitting back going, okay, well, why don't you tell me what you can do? At the end, I'm going to ask you to send me some information, but but they kind of have the mindset that they're not really going to make a decision on the spot. When I kind of share with them that the expectation is that we're going to talk at the end to figure out next steps, they end up becoming a lot more engaged. Then we're going to do a deep dive into what are their needs. So I find there is a hierarchy in terms of talking to people about their needs. If they've got a problem that needs to be fixed right now, they're more likely to make a quick decision. So real quick, how many of you have one of these, some kind of uh, iPhone, Android, something like that? My guess is if your phone were to break right now, can't make phone calls, can't get phone calls, can't get email, some of you might start shaking on the spot. and it would probably be an hour or two before you were out there getting a new phone. So what I want all of you to think about is for the clients that you work with, what does urgency look like? What would be an example of a problem that needs to be fixed right now that I need to engage with somebody immediately? Again, with litigation, maybe they're being sued, they need to be sued. With somebody else, again, with trust and estates, it may be okay. I'm sick. I need to put a will in place. I need to put something in place. Oftentimes, what all of you may run into is I know I'm going to have a problem in the future. So a couple years ago, huge rainstorm came in, started getting a leak into my family room. Well, I have a two-story family room. There was no bedroom, bathroom above it. It was coming from my roof. Got a roofer out on top of the roof. Roofer was like, "Yep, I see where that came in. I can patch that leak, but your roof is 22 years old. If the wind had blown in a different direction, there's 8 other places where water could have come through. How important is that stuff underneath your roof?" So I didn't have a new roof that day, but within the next 2 weeks, I had a couple estimates out. Within the next month, I had a new roof. So again, for a lot of you, a lot of the issues might be problems that they know that are going to come up if they're not working with an attorney. Sorry about that. So we want to make sure that we understand what that is. Unfortunately, a lot of folks, it's the cool bells and whistles that they talk about. Let me tell you about my years of experience, all of the things that I do. Again, we talked about before, if our phone breaks, we're going to go get a new phone immediately. My guess is when the newest version of your phone comes out, most of you are not in line day one to buy a brand new phone at full price. The camera might be a little bit better, the AI might be a little bit better, but a very small percentage of the population is going out to buy that first day. So again, we want to focus on the problems that we solve and what the impact of those problems could be versus touting our expertise and touting everything that we can do because that's not going to drive the urgency. And the least urgent is pleasure in the future. So what I like the attorneys that I work with to do is use your expertise to ask really good questions to get them to self-identify. So what are their challenges? How are their challenges impacting them? Are they willing to do something to fix the problem? As we're talking a little bit further, do they think that I can help? Do they want my help? I want them to raise their hand and say, "Hey, can you help me? Can we work together?" Versus feeling like they're being sold to. And then if we get really good at this, identifying what is this issue costing them in terms of time, money, liability, missed opportunities. I promise if we do a good job with that, all of a sudden that rate pushback is really going to be minimized if they see the value that you bring to the table. And I promise that you're also going to look, sound, feel a lot different than any other attorneys that they may be talking to. So again, we want to quantify what the cost of their challenges are and then determine, do they have a budget? If it's a company, whose budget is it coming out of? Can they make the decision? Do other people need to help them with that? Again, if where's the budget going to come from? If it's a little bit bigger, can it be broken down into smaller pieces? Maybe can we start with one thing first and then move on from there? What is their decision-making process? Especially, again, more not as much with an individual as much as with the company, but who's making the decision? Who else besides you're talking to is involved? What is the decision that they're making? Is it hiring an attorney versus not hiring an attorney? Have they decided they need to hire somebody? It's just a matter of who. When were they hoping to make the decision by? When were they hoping to get this started by? If you're dealing with a larger organization, where's the decision being made? Can they make it locally? Is it being made out of a national home office somewhere? If they've been dealing with the problem for a long time, why are they looking to do something now? If they are interviewing a couple of different attorneys, how are they going to go about making that decision? But if we had all of this information, is it going to make our job a lot easier in terms of determining whether or not we would like to work with the person, whether or not they're a good fit? and exactly what they would need to see from us before they'd be ready to move forward and make a decision. So for some of you, this may all happen in one 20 to 30-minute consult. For others of you who may be doing more corporate work, this may take place over 2 or 3 or 4 meetings over the course of weeks or months. So you may not necessarily be going through all of the steps every single time you have an initial conversation. And then for us, a lot of times we don't actually have to do a presentation. If we're asking the right kinds of questions, we talk about the rate, they see that we can help, we may move forward. Again, for the larger corporate opportunities, we may need to go in and do a presentation. But if we're doing a presentation, we should have a better sense of who we're talking to, what factors are going into making the decision, and then understanding what information we need to bring in and what we need to cover when we're doing that presentation. And then, quite frankly, if I'm doing the presentation, I want to get feedback in real time. I don't want to come out of the meeting, think I knocked it out of the park, and then never hear back from them ever again. So I'm asking them in real time, hey, from your perspective, did I cover everything that you wanted to cover? Is there anything that I missed that you were hoping I was going to cover? And get that feedback in real time versus making assumptions after the fact. And then I just want to make sure that nothing's going to fall through the cracks between the time I met with them and the time that we're getting started. So my guess is for most of you, you have sent out an engagement letter that never got returned, or sent out an agreement to somebody who swore they were going to get the agreement back to you, and then that agreement never came back. That follow-up meeting never got scheduled. So while I'm still talking to them, I'm asking them questions. I'm saying, geez, Nicole, if there's one thing that would keep you from getting this engagement letter back, what would it be? By the way, just so my office can look out for this, when do you expect to have this back to us? Just want to make sure that we're prepped. Probably won't happen here, but if we don't get it back by that time, how would you like me to follow up? But I want to do all of this while I'm still having a conversation with them, rather than getting ghosted after the fact, expecting to get something back and then not coming back. So hopefully with that process, you see where this may put us in a little bit more control versus having the other person in control. And hopefully you see that nothing that we're doing here is trying to trick them into doing something that's not in their best interest. We're really just trying to see if this is a good fit. And if it is, being on the same page in terms of how to move forward. And if it's not a good fit, identifying that so that nobody's wasting their time. So again, I took you through a lot for each of these. I gave you about 5 minutes of the hour to hour and a half of stuff that's behind it. But hopefully this just gives you a good construct of maybe a slightly different way, or things that you can add one or two different things in to help you convert a higher percentage of those intakes into new clients. So I'll open it up to what questions that folks might have.
Yeah.
Elliot?
Yeah, I have a question. We generally charge for consultations, and I was wondering how that squares with this and what you thought about that approach.
Great way to pre-qualify.
Mm.
My guess is you have less people no showing. Um,
Yeah,
I will work with some attorneys where if they're doing litigation or larger work, we'll apply the whatever was spent for the consult to the fuller engagement. But I think that's a great way to pre-qualify. But we don't want to just collect the fees on the consults. Again, we want to make sure that the right ones are converting into larger opportunities.
yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
that's great that you're doing that.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't know who was going to be next, but I was going to ask a question. I actually send out like an intake form when someone has inquired, and I just try to get some preliminary information so that I can at least see if they're even going to be worth scheduling a consultation with.
Yep. So, what percentage of the time does that intake form get filled out and returned?
I just started, so I have yet to have this one not returned. I guess I
Okay.
could.
So again, that's excellent, and that might even help you a little bit more with setting the agenda during the first call, with being prepared. So again, I think that that's outstanding that you do that. And quite frankly, a good pre-qualifier, because especially if it's something that only takes 5 or 10 minutes, if they're not willing to do that, may be
Right.
tough to work with them down the road.
Right. Okay.
I think somebody's trying to ask a question, but maybe you're on mute. So, any other questions? So here's what I want all of you to think about based on a couple of the things that we talked about. What are one or two things that you're going to start doing as a result of this? What are one or two things that you might stop doing as a result of this? And then, and then my contact information is here. If you want to email me, want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I do have a podcast. It's called the Sales and Marketing Playbook Unleashed. It's myself talking about the sales and business development side, a fractional marketing person talking about the marketing side, talking about the importance of both of them working together. So that is the YouTube page. You can also find it on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts. And if anybody is interested in learning a little bit more about what I do one-on-one coaching and very customized coaching with folks. I also have a 12-week program. I'm wrapping up the spring program now, and then we'll be starting another cohort right after Memorial Day. So if you're interested in learning more, please do not hesitate to reach out. Somebody asked about the presentation, and I can PDF the PowerPoint and send that out. So, but I appreciate everybody's participation, everybody's questions. Again, hopefully you were able to take two or three things out of this.
Thank you so much, Evan. I really appreciate it. I've got a lot from your presentation, and it just really helps to kind of like rethink the strategy, even if we are doing something. It just is very helpful. Thank you again. Really appreciate it. And again, if you are part of Colossus, or even if not, please join us. Our next meeting will be in person, and it's going to be in April. So I'll send out the email, get connected, stay in touch. And once again, thank you so much, Evan.